Who is the most talented entertainer of all time? Who was the worst US president ever? Technically, who's the greatest rapper of all time? And technically, who's the worst rapper of all time? All these questions and much more will be answered as we crown the one of four. There are many, many types of art, from dance to paintings, even movies. My personal favorite is music. With the right instrumentation, an artist's expression can take you to places out of this world. The originality, lasting effect, and overall feeling is the criteria that I will use to determine which is the greatest era of music of all time. The 1970s was the era of disco, soul, rock, and funk. Some of the artists that stood out during the 1970s are Elton John, the Eagles, Pink Floyd, the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Isley Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, Rolling Stones. The list goes on and on and on. You had that vinyl sound. There's no other sound in the world like a record. And the album artwork was incredible. I think that the ideas that were put into this era's artwork is something that not a lot of people have done, duplicated, and I sure don't see it in today's music. You have the originality, you have the feeling, and you do have the lasting effect. The 70s era covers all of those basics. We're talking about the experimentation of guitars with effects. We're talking about pushing the envelope. We're talking about bands. How many bands do we have today? We don't have many. And that's not taking anything away from solo artists. But when you have a collection of people who come together on a project and everybody pulls their own weight, something special is bound to happen. Now, one of the greatest selling albums of all time came out of this era. Hotel California sold 32 million copies, 26 times platinum in the 70s. Now, I don't think that's going to be done. I know it's not going to be done again because everything is digital. And it's so much easier to access music. A lot of people listen to singles now. Albums aren't really being sold the way that they were back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So with all that being said, I'm going to put the 1970s era up against the 2000s. Now, some of the standout artists of this era are Alicia Keys, Destiny's Child, Coldplay, Justin Timberlake, Outkast, Adele, Lil Wayne, Kanye West, Katy Perry, Beck, 50 Cent, Green Day. Now, after what I just said, Adele managed to sell 14 million records. That says a lot. In an era where people just go and buy singles, she still sold 14 million. Now, in this era, we go from CDs to MP3. Everything is being streamed now. This is the inception of trap music during this era. Love it or hate it, it's dominating all genres of music right now. And the album artwork. Now, I don't think the album artwork is anywhere close to the album artwork of the 70s. So let's go down the list. The originality of the music in this era. I've heard some songs that are very original, but then I've heard a lot more songs that bite off of that initial original song. I don't think there's too much creativity. Everyone is using the same effects or the same type of beat. But that's only in a particular genre. There are some genres where, they stay true and they are using instruments. Even if it's electronic, it's not as sampled. I'll even give you this. There are some trap producers who don't sample, but they use a very minimalistic approach. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid right off and say that 2000s doesn't hold a candle to the 70s era in almost any aspect. We can go down the list, the originality. I think that today's music kind of jumps on trends. Who's hot? Okay, so let's make music like this. What's selling? Let's make music like that. Versus just being able to experiment and do something brand new. And the lasting effect, will it last? I just heard somebody playing the Isley Brothers not too long ago. Will I hear this 20 years from now? Probably. Now, will I hear music from today, 20, 30 years from now? Yes, but I don't think it's going to be as prominent as the 70s music. It's timeless. So with all that being said, I'm going to give the nod to the 70s era versus the 2000 era. Now I'm going to move on to the 80s era. Now the 80s era is a juggernaut. You have Michael Jackson, you have Prince, you have U2, Guns N' Roses, Hall & Oates, Metallica, Whitney Houston, Rick James, Bon Jovi, Madonna, and you had the inception of the golden era of hip hop. Eric B. and Rakim, Public Enemy, LL Cool J. The list can go on and on and on with that. Now again, in this era, you had Michael Jackson, who had the best-selling, not greatest hits, individual album, the greatest selling album of all time in Thriller. He gave you a classic album. And not even to mention Prince with Purple Rain, another classic album. The Moonwalk. This is the inception really of electronic music. We went from the 70s where everything was, live instruments. Now you're getting drum machines and you're getting sequencers and, your DX7s and your Oppenheimers and all of these electronic keyboards. Now, we go from vinyl to tape. There's still vinyl being sold in the 80s, but now we're kind of doing the transference into tape. So now everything's portable, it's on the go. You got your little Walkman, you can listen to Thriller, you can listen to Purple Rain, you can listen to U2, you can listen to all of these great artists on the go. Now, the 80s music has a sound to it, something that is very distinct from any other genre. It's very colorful. If you look at the videos had a lot of color to it. The dancing, the way they wore their clothes, Now this is going to be one of the hardest matchups that I probably will ever do, because I'm putting the 80s genre up against the 90s genre. And it's very interesting how 10 years, a separation of 10 years can be so much different. The impact and the style and the culture can change so much in 10 years. So some of the greatest artists of the 90s are Nirvana, Mariah Carey, the Backstreet Boys, Nas, Snoop, Tupac, Biggie, Red Hot Chili Peppers, the Fugees, Eminem, Boyz II Men, Shania Twain, Tribe Called Quest, Busta Rhymes, TLC. You got Garth Brooks. The list goes on and on and on. Shania Twain had one of the best-selling albums of this era with 20 million. Now, this is when hip-hop really took off in the 90s. Now, they say the 80s is the golden era of hip-hop, but me personally, because this is my teenage years, the 90s. I mean, it's just the feeling, the jazzy, heavy D, like that jazzy, feel-good music, and they're really conveying a message. I think that is something that can stand the test of time, in my opinion. You also have DJs, grunge bands, and the album artwork was good too. Very good. I think the grunge band album artwork is something that I love. I love looking at these like Pearl Jam, some of their artwork. And the DJ, this was like the inception of the DJ too. Now, with all that being said, I don't know who really to pick? I mean, I can go either way, but I will say this. I think the 80s, I before I recorded this, I said the 90s, but I think the 80s only because of the culture at that point. And you have Prince and Michael Jackson in the same era. I mean, how can you beat that? So I'm going to get the very, very slight nod to the 80s. Now we've reached the showdown of the best era of music of all time, the 1970s versus the 1980s. Now the X Factor is pretty much non-existent. My X Factor was who sold the most albums, but you have Hotel California, which sold 32 million copies, and you have Thriller, which sold 33 million copies. So that's really non-existent. But if we go down this list one more time, the originality, the everlasting effect, and the feeling, I feel like the 70s music, I feel like 70s music is the greatest era of all time. So many artists. Okay, you have Michael Jackson in the 80s. You have Prince in the 80s. But Michael Jackson was also in the 70s. Solo artist and with the Jackson 5. So he's part of that era too. And I believe Prince was like at the tail end of the 70s. So with all that being said, it's almost a no-brainer. I almost had my mind made up before I did this video that the 70s was going to win, and I just reinforced it. When you go from selling of the albums, the artwork, the sound from vinyl, and so many soul music, disco music, rock, classic rock, all of these things put together, and the artist, it's unmatched. So with all that being said, this has been episode 3 of the 1 of 4. If you feel different, leave a comment. Please like and subscribe. I got more videos to come. Until next time, peace.